Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving right into what is arguably the most massive economic and geopolitical undertaking of our lifetime, and that's China's Belt and Road Initiative. Now, you hear about it constantly in the news, right? It's usually wrapped up in this really romanticized language of ancient caravans and spice routes. But what is actually happening on the ground? Well, in this explainer, we're going to completely separate that historical myth from today's hard economic data. And we'll look closely at what this all means for global trade, for technology, and of course, for global power dynamics. So here is our roadmap for today. First, the myth of the ancient Silk Road. Second, Xi Jinping's new project of the century. Third, the digital Silk Road. Fourth, geopolitics and global risks. Fifth, we'll do a reality check for 2024. And finally, number 6, our conclusion, the global master plan. Okay, let's jump right into part 1, the myth of the ancient Silk Road. To really understand this, we have to look back. The historical Silk Road dates all the way back to 100 BC under the Han Dynasty. Just to give you an idea of the scale, a round trip by caravan from Chang'an to the Mediterranean could literally take 6 to 8 years. And here's a fun fact for you. When Admiral Zheng He sailed his maritime routes back in the 15th century, his treasure ships were so massive that you could have easily parked Columbus's Santa Maria right on the deck. But there's a really common misconception here. People think this was just some loose network of independent merchants. Not quite. In reality, both the land and sea routes were highly state-driven master plans designed to make surrounding regions tributary to China. The initiative, it always came from the top down.
So the romanticized myth loves to focus on camels carrying silk, jade, spices, and gold. But the modern reality, it is vastly different. Today's Silk Road is deeply, deeply tied to the Made in China 2025 agenda. The ultimate goal isn't exporting cheap textiles anymore. Not at all. It's about securing absolute global dominance in high-tech, Industry 4.0, e-mobility, and smart cities. We're watching China rapidly upgrade from being the world's workbench to becoming a leading innovative technology superpower.
That brings us perfectly to Section 2, Xi Jinping's new project of the century. Let's look at the modern era. Back in 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping officially launched a mega project that intentionally echoes all of that ancient history we just talked about, but it comes with a very modern, very strict deadline: to make China the undisputed global economic power by 2049. And yes, that is perfectly timed for the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic. Now, you've got two main parts here. You have the land-based Silk Road economic belt, which is this massive transcontinental railway network stretching across Eurasia. Thanks to this, a freight train can now roll from Chongqing all the way to Duisburg, Germany in just 12 days. Honestly, Marco Polo would be jealous. Then you have the maritime Silk Road of the 21st century, which is hyper-focused on sea routes and acquiring strategic ports. A really prime example of this is the port of Piraeus in Greece. The Chinese state-owned company COSCO just stepped in and completely transformed it into a major hub for the European market. But building this massive dual-track network of land and sea requires staggering amounts of capital. International estimates put the cost at roughly $1 trillion US. I just want to pause for a second to really let that number sink in. $1 trillion. All of it dedicated to roads, bridges, high-speed rail, ports, power plants, and dams. And the physical and economic scale goes way beyond just that massive price tag. Just look at these numbers. The initiative involves 65 different countries. It reaches 4.5 billion people, which is roughly 70% of the entire global population. It encompasses 55% of the global GDP and controls a whopping 75% of the world's energy reserves. So make no mistake, this isn't just a trade route. It is literally the physical rewiring of the global economy. Moving on to Section 3, the digital Silk Road. Now, concrete and steel, that is really only half the story. Because in 2015, the project aggressively expanded into cyberspace with the Digital Silk Road, or DSR. Officially, it's framed as creating this global community of common destiny in cyberspace, but practically speaking, it's designed to significantly reduce reliance on American and Western digital technology. And what is so fascinating here is the strategy itself. China is actively building out networks in the global south. They're investing heavily in emerging markets where private Western companies previously just wouldn't risk investing, fully anticipating the massive future population growth in these regions. We are talking about the entire digital stack here. 5G networks, transoceanic fiber optic cables, satellite communications, rapid AI deployments, and massive data centers like the huge one planned in Serbia. Chinese heavyweights like Huawei and Alibaba Cloud are deeply, deeply integrating these technologies into national agendas all over the globe. If you look at the Gulf region, for instance, places like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are heavily partnering with Chinese firms to literally build entirely new smart cities and sovereign cloud services, completely from the ground up. Okay, let's pivot to Section 4, Geopolitics and Global Risks. As you might guess, an expansion of this magnitude creates massive geopolitical friction. But it's important to understand that Beijing views this pushback very differently than the West does. When they face criticism about a lack of democratic values or human rights in these partnerships, officials like the former Chinese ambassador to Germany, Xi Mingde, state it pretty bluntly. He said, "The West has no exclusive claim to democracy and human rights. Our socialist market economy has freed 700 million people from poverty." So China really insists on this policy of non-interference. They are offering a partnership model that prioritizes sheer economic growth without trying to dictate Western political values. However, when we impartially look at the documented impact on the ground in several of these partner nations, a pretty different picture starts to emerge. The systemic risks are very real. Economically, we see highly indebted developing nations facing severe dependency through what many analysts call debt traps. Strategically, Chinese investors have locked down massive control over foreign resources, things like gas in Turkmenistan and oil in Kazakhstan. Environmentally, some of these megaprojects have bypassed local protections, which has led to severe ecological damage, including illegal deforestation. And on the labor front, projects frequently bypass local workers almost entirely. They rely instead on imported Chinese labor, which ends up suppressing local wages and heavily restricting union rights. Which brings us to Section 5, a reality check in 2024. Despite all those grand visions and the massive spending of the early years, data recently compiled by Germany Trade and Invest in 2024 shows a really surprising reality check. The mega project is actually changing shape and, in many ways, cooling off. While energy, transport, and industry are still leading the pack, the total volume is dropping. The total number of projects recorded was 1,007 in 2024. That's down noticeably from 1,214 the year before. The numbers are actually shrinking in almost all world regions, with just a few exceptions, like the Gulf states. So that initial era of unchecked, massive expansion, it's definitely slowing down. But, and this is crucial, this isn't a retreat. It's an evolution. Back in 2013, the initiative basically ran on these massive state-funded loans from the China Development Bank and the Exim Bank. By 2018, we saw peak physical infrastructure being built, right alongside that massive debt accumulation in partner countries. But today, in 2024, the Chinese state has largely pulled back from financing these massive loans directly. Instead, they're pivoting hard to strategic, green and smart projects, and they're relying heavily on foreign capital, like incredibly wealthy investors from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, to actually foot the bill, while Chinese state companies execute the contracts. Basically, China is brilliantly transitioning from being the primary financier to the primary contractor. And finally, Section 6, Conclusion, the Global Master Plan. So, what does this all mean for the future of global power? Well, even with the slowdown we're seeing in 2024, China is still executing a highly strategic, incredibly long-term vision. They are adapting, they're optimizing, and they are continuing to aggressively build out physical and digital networks globally. Meanwhile, the West, and particularly Europe, often appears completely fragmented, really struggling to present a unified strategy or a compelling alternative. As the roads and the digital networks of the 21st century continue to be built, the ultimate question really remains. China stringently follows its long-term master plan. What is Europe's answer? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope it sparked your curiosity to look a bit closer at the infrastructure that is fundamentally shaping our world.